Hi, this is Jaden who wants to be the best booktuber on YouTube. The book recommended for you in this video is How to Be an Imperfectionist. This book is about how to get rid of perfectionism and make our life better. You may feel a little strange because according to our understanding, perfectionist is not a bad word. Even in life, there are always people who complain to their friends that I'm a bit of a perfectionist or I'm a perfectionist. I don't know if you have noticed when saying these words, although the person is admitting their shortcomings, but always feel a little pride? Even when asked in an interview, what is your biggest flaw? Perfectionism is also a very popular shield. We have the impression that perfectionism is the same as wanting to do things right, wanting to strive for excellence, and it is precisely perfectionism that gives us the motivation to change our lives. But this book tells us that perfectionism is an unabashed fraud that wears the veneer of perfection but lures you into becoming a pessimistic, sluggish, lackadaisical person. Many of us have insignificant problems such as procrastination, allodoxophobia, social phobia, OCD, fear of challenges, emotional depression, etc. Behind them all is actually perfectionism at work. This book is a perfectionist behavior correction guide written for each of us. It tells us that only by becoming imperfectionists and no longer adhering to perfectionist thinking and habits of life can we improve our mobility, strengthen our self-identity, and achieve a healthy life and emotional state. The author of this book is Stephen Guise. He used to be an unassuming freelance writer. To change himself, he began exploring the secrets of improving mobility in 2012. 2016, he became a world-renowned best-selling author with his acclaimed book Mini Habits, which has been translated into 17 languages and sold 300,000 copies. In this book, How to Be an Imperfectionist, he gives us some proven methods to help us conquer perfectionism. I will divide it into two parts to help you understand the book. In the first part, we will talk about why perfectionism imprisons our life. In the second part, let's see how we can become a free imperfectionist. To make this clear, we need to talk about what kind of mentality is perfectionism. To be honest, in this book, the author has no way to give an accurate definition of perfectionism. Because psychologists have different definitions of perfectionism. But what psychologists can say for sure is that perfectionism is not exactly a positive state of mind, it also contains a lot of negative psychology. For example, in 2004, researchers at Appalachian State University introduced a perfectionism scale, which contains 8 positive dimensions such as neatness and orderliness, the pursuit of excellence, and thorough planning, but also negative, such as excessive demands on others, worrying about faults, need for approval, parental pressure, and entanglement. In this book, the author has reanalyzed and reorganized. He argues that perfectionism contains 5 negative mindsets: over-expectation, entanglement, need for approval, worry about faults, and concern for action. You will find that there is a difference between perfectionism and the mere pursuit of excellence. Perfectionism is much more complex, and these negative factors it contains can in many cases create obstacles for us. At some point, perfectionism can even lead us to hide a fear of failure under the banner of pursuing excellence. Let's look at an example of 2 craftsmen who entered a carving competition together. They both wanted to carve a first-class piece. However, in the course of the competition, they both made a major mistake and lost the competition. Craftsman was so discouraged that he kept recalling how humiliated he was at the moment of his mistake, and even felt that he was a loser and could not do anything right. In order not to make a fool of himself again, he decided not to participate in the unsure competition in the future. Craftsman B, on the other hand, felt sorry for his failure, but he loved carving and knew that failure is an ordinary thing to a general, so he practiced more at home and soon threw himself into the next competition with courage, constantly challenging the upper limit of his carving skills. It is easy to see that although they both appear to be in pursuit of excellence, their attitudes toward failure display a different emotional core. Craftsman A refuses to accept imperfection, he denies the value of failure and is a typical perfectionist. He sets limits on himself for fear of failure and no longer challenges himself courageously. In contrast, Craftsman B is the one who truly pursues excellence. He acknowledges the significance of failure, accepts imperfection, and refines the spirit of craftsmanship in pursuit of excellence. This example inspires us that perfectionism and the pursuit of excellence are not the same. If perfectionism is an iceberg, that small ice pick exposed on the surface is their desire for perfection, while below the surface, occupying 90% of the main body of the iceberg, is their fear of failure. In other words, perfectionism may not necessarily make you want to win more, it also has the potential to make you more afraid of losing. Because of the fear of losing, perfectionism will prevent us from acting and from playing. Have you ever experienced this? You feel that you are a little fat, so you gave yourself a 2-month plan to lose 10 pounds, and you also did a fitness card for this, requiring yourself to go at least 3 days a week. Each time you must have to exercise 30 minutes. However, there are always unexpected things to break your plan, such as bad weather, friends getting together, work too tired, etc. If your friend suggests that you can go out for a walk every morning in pieces, you will be very reluctant. Because you think the time is too early, the community environment is also bad, cannot achieve the effect you expected. So you simply give up, depressed all day, from the psychological began to dislike yourself, feel fat and ugly. This is actually the fault of perfectionism. Because we always expect to have a perfect experience at a perfect time and perfect place. It is this mental state of waiting for the perfect time and conditions before acting that becomes our excuse for not acting and also disintegrates our self-confidence. Imagine if we did everything under perfect conditions, reading a book in a cafe on a relaxing afternoon, studying in a spotless room, dating in a sunny and romantic place. That at most imperfect times we are unable to act and our lives will lose a lot of possibilities. In addition to this, some studies prove that perfectionism affects play. A project team did a test on 51 undergraduate women on their level of perfectionism. After the test, they were then asked to abbreviate a passage, asking them to be as concise as possible while retaining the full meaning of the original text. It turned out that the group with the highest degree of perfectionism did much less well on the abbreviation test than the group with the lowest degree of perfectionism. Why is this? Experts explain that perfectionism tends to adjust the intensity of human consciousness to the limit, which can interfere with the subconscious thought activity. That is, the more you concentrate on the task to achieve perfection, you deliberately remind yourself of the perfection of the consciousness to crowd your thinking space, affecting your performance. Therefore, perfectionism is actually not as good as it seems. Because the nature of the world we live in is imperfect, perfectionism makes us unable to accept anything less than perfection. Perfectionism has the potential to be a driving force for some people in certain critical matters, but if the imperfection is not tolerated at all times, it will bring us more harm than good. Since perfectionism has such harmful effects, why is it still so popular? In the book, the author makes a conjecture that in our experiences from childhood to adulthood, people around us are too concerned with the results and neglect the process. How do you understand this statement? Think about it. From the time you are a baby, mom and dad start focusing on the outcome. Baby learns to walk, awesome. A baby can talk, awesome. In school, grades are the only measure of your academics. When you get to society, your boss will again measure your value by performance standards. Over time, we inevitably develop a sense that results are crucial and the process of achieving them is just a means to an end. The shorter the process, the better. Otherwise, it's a hindrance to yourself. To get the perfect result, you start to make the perfect plan and bind yourself to the goal. When the goal is achieved, you reap the pleasure of a very short period, and then start to find yourself new deficiencies again, and then devote yourself to the next plan. When the goal is difficult to achieve, you will be afraid that others will see your failure, so you start to set limits for yourself. Not allowing yourself to do something challenging will reveal their shortcomings. For example, you do not dare to impromptu speech in front of the public, even if you like to express your views. You dare not participate in knowledge competitions, even if you have enough knowledge reserves. You are afraid to confess your love for a girl, even if you like her. Because more than being praised, you want to avoid the embarrassing results of mistakes. Have you noticed that perfectionism has become a kind of habitual thinking in your habits? It confines you to a standardized box, taking your infinite life possibilities and making them very limited. So, how do we break through the limited, bold action and embrace the infinite possibilities of life? The author offers us a new idea: become an imperfectionist. As we mentioned earlier, the essence of perfectionism is not the desire to win, but the fear of losing. It allows people to set limits on themselves for fear of failure, protecting themselves in a safe zone and making it difficult to break through. In contrast, the key to becoming an imperfectionist is to allow yourself to openly accept imperfection and affirm the value of failure. You should note that accepting failure is not the same as settling for failure. On the contrary, imperfectionists are the true seekers of excellence. They only focus on the immediate opportunities and progress, never on whether the conditions are perfect and whether the results will be satisfactory. It is this spirit of focusing on little by little progress and not caring about success or failure that allows them to instead defy hardship, rise to the occasion, and constantly break through their ceiling. NBA star McGrady has a very perfect interpretation of imperfectionism. Anyone who likes basketball should have heard of his classic T-Max time, a magical 35-second, 13-point play. In 2004, the Rockets and Spurs played a very exciting game on the court in Houston, USA. With 1 minute left in the game, the Rockets were down by 10 points. At this point, the Rockets players were demoralized and the fans were discouraged to leave the game early. In contrast, the Spurs were in high spirits, playing conservatively and trying to win the game by putting it off until the end. When everyone thought the situation was settled, McGrady rose to the top, and he made 3 3-pointers plus a 3+1 in the last 35 seconds, reversing the situation and leading the Rockets to victory, achieving the T-Max time in the history books. Both the Spurs and McGrady's teammates showed a degree of perfectionism in this game. The Spurs, fearing defeat in the final minutes, were determined to play it safe, setting limits on themselves and not pursuing bigger breakthroughs. And McGrady's teammates were also frustrated by the continued points they were giving up and similarly set their limits and stopped dreaming of success. However, in the face of an unfavorable game, McGrady did not fall into a state of perfectionist self-imposed limits. Imagine if McGrady was on the court thinking, "Oh my God, there are 35 seconds left to the end of the game, and to win means I have to make 4 3-pointers in 35 seconds. He would have been intimidated by this huge target like everyone else and would have been powerless to turn the situation around. What he chose to do, instead, was to accept the imperfect situation openly and rise to the occasion, focusing only on every opportunity to shoot the ball. In an interview, McGrady recalled, "What was I thinking? All I was thinking was don't give up. I just need to throw the ball and try to break it down when they drive the ball. If it doesn't break, then use foul play to get them on. I didn't think about the outcome at all, just focused on what I was supposed to do at the moment, and I didn't even know how many goals I scored." It is this imperfectionist way of thinking that forged the T-Max time. If perfectionism is a mindset that confines our life in a limited space, then imperfectionism is an ideal model that breaks through the finite and places our life in an infinite space. So how do we become imperfectionists? Perfectionism is a mindset that has been incorporated into our habits. Becoming an imperfectionist means that you have to change the original muscle memory through certain strategies. So what kind of strategy should we use? The author offers us a simple method here, the mini-task method. Mini-task, simply put, is to force yourself to implement some incredibly small positive action every day. For example, 1 push-up a day, read a page a day. These actions are so small that they will not fail, so small that you will not be easily abandoned because of special circumstances. They have a dual role to motivate you to continue to do and become a habit. Since the author shared this method on his blog in 2012, it has helped hundreds of people get out of their perfectionism and consistently improve their mobility. Why can mini-tasking help us get rid of perfectionism? It's because it's scientific and fits the habitual mode of operation of our brain. In our brain, there is a part that performs habits called the basal ganglia. There is also a part that determines habits, called the prefrontal cortex. The basal ganglia is a very stubborn part of the brain that repeats some of the habits we have developed every day and maintains this state for a long time until it receives new instructions. It does 45% of our behavior automatically, without thinking. The prefrontal cortex, its boss, is responsible for weighing the pros and cons and leaving the good habits to the basal ganglia. However, it has a major fault, which is that it is very easily fatigued. Once it decides to make some big goal a daily habit, it will make you give up on your blood sugar level and negative emotions. For example, in the morning it helps you analyze the benefits of eating a light meal, and at noon it gets fatigued and your body says to you, "Damn, forget it, I'm too hungry, I need a full meal." Even though there are times when the prefrontal cortex passes the big task goal to the basal ganglia, you can't stick to it because the basal ganglia are not adaptable and think the big goal is getting in the way of its original way of functioning. For example, you rely on the willpower of the prefrontal cortex to eat a light meal for 2 days, but your basal ganglia find that the new action is coming on fiercely, affecting the operation of other habits, and simply through the brain to remind you to strike early. In such a dilemma, the mini-task comes into its own. It is so small that it has no perceived difficulty and does not burden your prefrontal cortex with any fatigue. It is also small enough not to interfere with your habit patterns and not to be rejected by the basal ganglia. With such a mini-task, you unconsciously incorporate positive action into your habitual mode of operation, forming a new habit that your brain can adapt to. Even if you escalate the difficulty of this goal later, you can do it with ease, because the basal nerves are already familiar with it. It follows that our brain is itself an imperfectionist, and it cannot take on the enormous goal pressure that perfectionism brings. These seemingly imperfect mini-tasks are instead very much in line with the way the brain is used to functioning and can bring us long-lasting benefits. On top of that, mini-tasks develop an important ability, which is to shift our focus from results to process. Perfectionists tend to focus only on results. When they feel the result is promising, they are so focused on the stability that they refuse to try any breakthroughs. But if we can break down the big scary task into uninterrupted mini-tasks, then we can develop an ability to focus on the process. Let's say that when you wake up on a weekend morning and plan to go to a lecture, if you focus on the outcome, you'll easily give up. It's like a segment on the internet. You don't necessarily understand the lecture, you don't necessarily do the questions, you don't necessarily pass the exam, you don't necessarily graduate after passing the exam, you don't necessarily find a job after graduating, and you don't necessarily find a date after finding a job. Although it is a laughing matter, you will find that if you focus on the results, it is indeed easy to discourage people. What you need to do at this point is to break up getting up and attending a lecture into precisely 2 mini-tasks. Task 1, you just roll over and go to the side of the bed. Task 2, you get out of bed. Task 3, you just need to take 2 steps and go turn off the alarm clock. Task 4, now go brush your teeth and wash your face and you're awake. And so on, and you'll find that if you can consciously focus on the mini-tasks of the moment, you won't be intimidated by the whole grandiose task. A more difficult process is less difficult when it is broken down into steps to see. By getting us to focus on the process and the present moment, mini-tasks break down the perfectionist mindset that only cares about results and takes us one step closer to the imperfectionism of positive action and defying the odds. Mini-tasking is more than that. It can also encourage you to rise to the challenge and boost your sense of satisfaction. We know that perfectionists also face a dilemma, the fear of tasks that rely on the performance, such as presentations, exams, socializing, etc., which we collectively refer to here as performance tasks. When faced with these tasks, we usually want to bring out the best in every detail and not leave ourselves with regrets, fearing that we will make a joke if we don't perform well in any part. But this perfectionist thinking can make us too worried about making mistakes and generate negative emotions and fear of action. In fact, we can overcome our fear of failure by consciously transforming expressive tasks into mini-numeric tasks. A mini-numerical task, according to the author, is a task made up of zeros and ones. 0 is not done, 1 is done. Doing is success and perfection. No need to consider how well the process performed. For example, switching lights on and off is a typical mini-numeric task. Imagine that at this moment your task is to press the switch to turn on the lights in the room. All you have to do is press it, and the task is complete. Even if you fall in the process, as long as you turn it on, you've done your job brilliantly. In this mini task, turn on the light is 1, do not open is 0. Do not care if you do a good job in the process. Similarly, if you can see the performance task as a mini-numeric task and define perfect as done instead of done well, then your heart will no longer be filled with fear. You can boldly and brilliantly meet the challenge again and again. For example, you are about to give a 1-hour presentation in a lecture hall for 5,000 people. If you are a perfectionist, you are likely to seek perfection in all details, have a perfect performance, and leave a good impression on the public. But what if you define presentation success as getting to the podium and getting the message across? All you have to do is walk up to the podium and deliver what you want to say, and you've succeeded. The only way you fail is if you don't say a word, and even if you make a lot of mistakes in your speech, you get a score of 1 instead of 0. Often, perfectionists are always encouraged to say that to change, you have to accept imperfection, but a realistic and feasible approach is to redefine the so-called perfection. You can do this naturally by adopting the approach of the mini-numeric task. To be able to give a presentation in front of 5,000 people, to be brave enough to do it and not care about the outcome, is already a pretty impressive achievement. People will always see making mistakes as going backward, but for perfectionists, all the mistakes we make on the way to one are acceptable. Only by simplifying the goal, it is easier to achieve success and enter the virtuous circle of success. Finally, I would also like to share a few of my personal feelings. Before reading this book, I didn't realize the harm that perfectionism can invisibly do to us. We allow it to manipulate us, criticize us, and drag us down into the depths of our thinking. It places us in a cage shrouded in fear and keeps us in a state of stagnation and self-hatred. But this book shows us that imperfection is the nature of the world and the way our brains work. When we train ourselves with less than perfect mini tasks, we discover that we can run so freely, boldly, and fearlessly toward excellence. The best is the enemy of the better. If a single-minded pursuit of perfection will only make people physically and mentally exhausted, but when we let go of the baggage of perfectionism in our hearts, we can instead get closer and closer to perfection. Congratulations, you've grown up again. Subscribe for more book reviews and recommendations like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. You can also click the share button to share this video with your friends. Thanks for your watching.